Welcome, and thank you for joining us for a conversation about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the media industry. Today, I'm joined by Annette Thomas, the CEO of Garden Media, Guru Garapan, the CEO of Verizon Media, and Michael Friedenberg, the president of Reuters. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to massive changes in the way that media organizations operate and journalists work. Journalists are working remotely, travel is limited, and we need to hold conferences like this virtually. I'd like to start with a question about the biggest takeaway from this shift to remote work. Let's start with Annette.
Well, that's a great question. Let me start by saying that we're global at The Guardian. We have major offices in the UK, which is where I am right now, in the US, and also in Australia. So we've learned to work from anywhere. We still have a core group of editors and production staff that are coming into the office in London, largely to produce the UK print newspaper. And obviously the conditions in the US and Australia have varied quite a bit. So there's been a lot of adaptation that's had to go on, like I know it has for everyone. I think that as we go forward, what we're really thinking about and what I believe is that this hybrid model of distributed and office-based work is here to stay. And obviously that's supported by digital connectivity. I think that we've experienced the fact that over the past year, we've had actually relatively high productivity and quite a bit of satisfaction around the way that we've had to work. But I do realize that's been built up over several years of conversations and relationships between people that we've really been able to leverage during this period. Think about when we go forward, how is that going to change? Well, I do think that this hybrid model will continue. I'm just checking that you can still hear me. My internet connection is a bit unstable. So this hybrid approach will continue. And the biggest challenge is going to be how to make that work over the long term to create the best rather than the worst of both worlds. In particular, what we're focused on is the aspects that are challenged by a more distributed model, in particular around collaboration and creativity, which is really important to how we work. Onboarding new staff and passing on those cultural norms is something that needs to be adapted, and several sort of key processes that we're rethinking in terms of how we go forward. And just sort of one really interesting insight and one benefit of this more distributed way of working. In the UK, 3 times a week, our editorial staff, led by our editor-in-chief, Kath Viner, have what we call morning conference, where they come together to discuss the key topics of the day and the week. And that's actually been moved virtual, and now it's open for all staff. And that's created this incredibly dynamic and interconnected relationship between so many of our staff that wasn't possible in the physical world. So we're thinking about how do we capture those positives and take those forward, while making sure that we maintain the physical contact that we need for sort of collaboration and creativity.
So Guru, what has been your biggest takeaway from this shift to remote work?
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Helen, for having me here. It's good to be talking about this. You think about it's similar to what Annette was just saying. I would echo one, we are fairly global. When you think about Verizon Media, we touch 900 million consumers on a monthly basis globally across many, many key markets. That means we also have teams everywhere. One of the key themes that when this whole thing started last year, the first thing I said is, guess what? We have 11,000 headquarters now. Every home is its own headquarter. And, that brings a lot of flexibility, that brings a lot of connectedness, and that brings a lot of equality and inclusiveness. So the big takeaways, if I take that as a foundation, number one is agility. Our business is agile, given the nature of business we are in, and we can pivot quickly to innovate. Few things we did that in that bucket. When the transition started, we transitioned seamlessly to work from home with, I'll take Yahoo Finance as an example. The production team they shifted live. We do bell-to-bell coverage to entirely work from home. Within, I would say 24 hours, we were doing that. For our consumers looking for content and information, they could trust, we created things like Coronavirus Hub, the Yahoo Life. It was a new property that was dedicated to mental health and well-being news and resources within, of course, the COVID Hub was up right away. The Yahoo Life took us, a few weeks to get that up, but again, showing agility. And we also moved very quickly to start innovating with live events, given a lot of the in-person big events were not happening. So we produced things like, reset your mindset at home with Yahoo Sports. We started things like, for NFL, watch together, which you can do a lot of, with your friends and family watching, sporting event. You're not there in person. And then, even extending popular events like Berkshire Hathaway shareholder live stream. Yahoo Finance was, the sole, content provider for that, but really moving all of that to remote. TechCrunch Disrupt, again, making them fully virtual. It's one of the biggest startup events that happens in the ecosystem, and really making that fully virtual, and ramping up into new world of user experience. Think about, connected TV, what's happening with streaming and the demand growing from consumers. So a lot of that I would say is in the agility bucket. The second part I would say the takeaway for is responsible business. One of the things I've said is how businesses react and act during this time frame will also define how the ecosystem looks at you and the stakeholders look at you for next 10 years plus. So one of the big things we focused during that part of the responsible business was mental health. Mental health has been more crucial than ever entering this phase. Mental health had been a priority for us as Verizon Media well before pandemic, but COVID-19 has emphasized the need for companies to support mental health for their employees, customers, and the world at large. And when you think about mental health and physical health, they go hand in hand, and COVID has created a crisis in both areas. So the idea there being companies must act now to meet the moment, and also give supporting services, programs, and trusted content, not just for their employees, but for their customers. And we were right in the middle, and we've done a lot of activity, from giving tools to employees, creating mandatory training, getting experts like, Deepak Chopra to Laurie Gottlieb, to you name it, to come in and really educate our employees and help us get through on a weekly basis. And then the last piece I would say takeaway was mission, and which I think is the fundamental or the foundation of everything we do, right? Having a clear mission and not moving away from that is very, very imperative. With the majority of the workforce working remotely, employees can feel disconnected. So at Verizon Media, our mission is to connect people to their passions, and we're very, very focused on creating the best experience for our consumers and actually for all the stakeholders. So I would say, coming back to it, is agility, responsible business, and mission collectively is what the biggest takeaway was for us.
Michael, Reuters has journalists all over the world collecting news during this time. Can you speak about their safety and how it has been a priority for you during this pandemic?
Yeah, Helen, and again, thank you for having me as well. As Guru and Annette said, I mean, first and foremost, safety of our journalists is paramount, right? And I think what is very unique as it pertains to the pandemic is that this is, Reuters journalists are prepared and trained to rush into these situations and cover these situations. What's very unique is that they never think or have never had to deal with bringing that situation back to their home in their own personal life. And so the focus that we've had on their physical safety as well as their mental well-being has been absolutely paramount. So us leaning into our CIC services, expanding our peer networks, supporting of the Mental Health Day across the globe, these are all, and the training that we're providing our journalists each and every day is something that we take great pride in. I mean, we're serving billions of people across the globe each day in over 200 locations across the world. So this is nothing new to us as it pertains to covering really difficult situations, but it is something on a global scale that is quite unique. And it's something that we have really put a lot of attention towards in making sure our journalists are safe.
So the pandemic has driven record numbers of people to seek fact-based information. But at the same time, many advertisers are suffering and pulling back their spending. So I'm curious to hear how your businesses have been affected by that and the most significant impact of the pandemic on your business model. Guru, could you speak to that, please?
Sure. I'll tell you, look, the pandemic, of course, had an impact on, overall, when you think about the business model. But, there was, call it temporary blip in terms of change in user behavior that led to, some of those dips, but it's come back. We've seen us bounce back really strong, as you think about even our recent results in Q4 of 2020 results growing double digits. So I would say that's an important part of that. Now, one of the big parts of the transition, I would call it, our strategy, if you look back to almost 3 years now, when we said one of the ideas was around diversifying revenue across advertising, subscriptions, and commerce. And that was already in place. So we had a head start on thinking about not just the ad-based business model, but also how you can create a much bigger closed loop ecosystem around subscription business and commerce business. So that helped us really stabilize much faster. Now, the ad-based business model, to be very honest, that's a very core part of what we do. As much as you would say, there was a dip where, as the pandemic kicked off. But the good news is you look at the ad market, that's growing. That's if you look at globally, a 600 billion plus market growing at a good high single digit as a market size itself. So that is not the only thing. Is you do need to figure out how you transition into a lot of the as you think about different business models to complement that. So I would, coming back to it, as there was the impact on certain categories as you think about travel and entertainment to start of the pandemic. But then there are categories that picked up as you think about the advertising market, like media, the content consumption eventually came back up and did really well. Commerce and retail did really well. Gaming, so the key for an ecosystem like our size is, as and when you find certain gaps, you balance it out with where the opportunities are and how you target consumers around it. And then on top of it, really having new business models that we started. Commerce was one where we came in and we started doing a lot of commerce, and we had one of the best years last year. When I think about you in Q4, our consumer commerce revenue grew more than 180% year on year. So pieces like that complement the ad market and also closes the loop for customers made a big difference. And I would say the Q2 impact last year was temporary when you look at it. We are now back on the rise, as you think about content consumption, as you think about the ad spend, and advertising was one of our biggest drivers in Q4, double-digit growth. Something like our demand-side platform grew north of 40%, which again shows to the strength of how much of a long-term impact that's going to have. So I don't see this continuing. I think we're back up in the rise in terms of the ad models, the subscription models, and the transaction model.
And Annette, The Guardian has a really interesting business model. Could you speak about that and also your experience over the past 6 months to a year?
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a great question. And I get asked part of that question quite a bit, actually, because I joined as CEO for 2 weeks, and then we were in lockdown and have been pretty much in lockdown since then. So it's been a really interesting first year. In fact, next week is my year anniversary, so it's great. It's great to be reflecting on that. You asked about our business model at The Guardian, and it is really unique. The Guardian's business model starts first and foremost with its mission, its purpose, and that is that our journalism aims to create clarity and hope through independent investigative reporting. And that really is the starting point for everything that we do, both editorially and commercially. And because of that, we have a really loyal audience, and we've seen record levels of traffic during this past year. They're coming for Guardian journalism. And over several years ago now, The Guardian moved to develop part of its business model around readers and asking readers to contribute to support Guardian journalism. And there were many skeptics that this could work. And the fact is, it has been working, it is working. And it provides us with a really interesting and very powerful opportunity, because our readers are supporting us because they're aligned with that purpose, with that mission. They really value the distinctive Guardian journalism that lives up to that purpose. And we have a relationship with them that we can now think very creatively about how we build on that going forward. What's really important in all of this is that we have decided to keep our journalism open. And the reason for that is that we believe that journalism has such power and impact that it should be available to all. So you're wondering, well, what is the business model? We've already been very successful at how we relate to our readers and develop products and services around that open business model that they value and that they are willing and very actually enthusiastic to contribute to. And we're looking now over the coming months and years about how we build out from that. We've seen a 43% increase year on year in the revenue that we generate from our readers around this business model. Our reader revenue is now over 2/3 of the overall revenue base of The Guardian. So the distinctive journalism, the mission and purpose, the very strong brand, and the commitment to all of that is what we're thinking about and how we're building our future.
And how concerned are the three of you about what increased vaccine rollouts might mean for news consumption? You know, as people leave their homes and go out in the world, are you concerned about a slowdown in interest in the kind of news and journalism that you create? Michael, perhaps you could start with that.
No, I'm actually quite excited about that. I mean, I think what we're all seeing across all of our businesses right now is great and quality content drives engagement. So I don't think that's going to change one bit. And if you look at the macroeconomic conditions where right now the global economy seems pretty stable, liquidity is high, CEO confidence is high. I think these are all things that are going to manifest itself to making sure that the media business is certainly in a stable place. Now, what I do think will happen is if you look back in history, whenever you come out of some sort of recessionary or disruptive type event, what you usually have are the companies that have taken that opportunity to invest and innovate. They come out of that downturn or much faster than the ones that have not. So I do think there's going to be a further separation between what we say winners or losers of this category. But overall, I feel very confident in user behavior, and I feel very confident about the media companies that have taken this opportunity to invest and innovate over this past year.
So do you see this as creating more of a have and have not situation between big media outlets and smaller? Like, do you see it creating more of a gap in terms of those who have been innovating? Like, you know, what? I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I think it's less about size. I think it's more about focus. And I think Guru just talked about that a little bit before as well. Is there, we took this as at Reuters as an opportunity to really lean into our customers. We support and do business with over 2,000 media companies and broadcasters across the globe. And we understood, I think, very well the pressures that media companies were under. And we took that as an opportunity to really, I think, prove our value during a very difficult time. And I think coming out of this, it will hopefully pay dividends. So I don't think it has anything to do with scale. I think it has more to do with focus and taking advantage of the opportunities.
Also on the business front, there's been a lot of attention recently to big tech and the news publishers with regulation in certain countries requiring Google and Facebook to pay news publishers for their content and share revenue. I know that The Guardian and Reuters have both struck deals with Google to feature their journalism. So I'm curious, all three of you, maybe starting with Annette, where do you see this issue going? What do you think of this regulation designed to address the news industry's problems with the platforms?
Well, it's certainly a really timely question. I think that it's really imperative that we have a healthy ecosystem around big tech and news, and one that can be sustainable. I think that the developments in Australia over the past few weeks, which have been in train for some time, are really important. I'm pleased that we're beginning to see that there is an acknowledgement of the value of news, and that we can begin to establish a playing field where that value can be recognized also by news publishers. I think that's a really good development. I think it's going to be imperative that governments everywhere, though, continue to push to ensure that that ecosystem is robust everywhere in the world, and that quality journalism is put in a position where it's not subsidized, but the value that it brings to society is recognized, and the role that it plays in big tech is also recognized.
Yeah, I think I would just sort of echo what Annette just said. I mean, the importance and engagement of quality journalism has never been higher. And at the same time, I believe that value should be recognized throughout that ecosystem. I'm not a big believer that media companies need to become dependent upon regulation in order to succeed. And at the same time, vice versa, I don't think it's upon media companies, I should say, regulations to subsidize media companies. So, and governments to subsidize media companies. So, to me, I think we just have to have a true value exchange across that ecosystem, where the value that we are producing in that high quality journalism is actually not only paid for, but actually shown in the just as much value from our readers as it is to our customers.
I would just, and I think, Michael, to add to, what you're saying, I think that value creation piece is so important. And one of the pieces, you think about Yahoo ecosystem, we do focus on creating original content and reporting. And, we are also one of the largest aggregators. We have, partnership with Reuters and many other, news, content creators. And we believe in doing the right thing in terms of doing the business. And, as I said, we've done a lot of licensing agreements with other news sources. So the key here is working hard to create excellent content and really partnering and being also an excellent partner. This particular issue, we are, of course, watching it closely. As with anything, it is important that policymakers focus on targeted solutions and ensure that any changes they are pushing will have the desired impact. Traditionally, we've seen these kind of things happen. There are several sources I've seen that have noted that the Australia Code will likely be to the benefit of large publishers, but could negatively impact smaller local publishers. So how do you bring balance? I'm looking forward to watching how this plays out. My big concern is always what happens. Any of these policies generally have an impact on smaller and medium-sized publishers. How do you make sure it's equal and everybody has the same platform? So that's one to watch for.
I just wanted to pick up on what Guru and Michael were saying, because I think, to be clear, fair licensing for quality journalism is one particular issue, and it's important. But there are larger issues at stake with the platforms and their dominance. As The Guardian, we've consistently argued for many years that governments have to play a role when it comes to establishing fair and transparent regulation of platforms, both in terms of the impact on the quality of the public information and debate, but also the media sector in particular. And so ultimately, what we need are the same things in the digital economy that we've always needed in all sectors of the economy: fair trading, open choices, trust and transparency of all the parties involved. And we'll continue to hold platforms to account, because this really is just the beginning, I think, of the evolution that we're going to see in the overall digital economy.
So some of the deals that have been put in place recently, are for a few years. Do you feel as though this is still going to be an issue beyond the terms of those deals? And do you think that there still needs to be additional structural changes in place? Is this a short-term solution? Is it something that is laying the foundation for a more long-term solution? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think that, it's obviously a global digital economy, and there's been a lot of focus on Australia at the moment, but it's an issue in the US, it's an issue in Europe, in the UK. And I think that we'll continue to see this evolve as we go forward. So I don't think that there's not a magic bullet answer. It's not that simple, but we do need to continue to be engaged and to actively participate in this. in a way that we can end up with an ecosystem that is fair and that is transparent and that is open.
Got it. And you mentioned the topic, Guru, of the smaller publishers versus the larger, and how we still need to have an equal playing field where smaller and mid-sized publishers can still thrive. I'm wondering if the pandemic has illuminated for you a need to have a more diverse business model, a more diversified business model that doesn't just rely exclusively on advertising. I mean, all three of you have business models that have many different revenue streams, but has the pandemic really emphasized that point, that that is something that needs to happen in case, you know, a similar dip like this were to occur in the future with advertisers? I mean, is that really something that you think is a long-term takeaway from this, or do you think I'm overstating that? And I'll send that to Guru, please.
Sure. You know, I would say, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, you know, for us, we actually started that kind of diversification of business model almost now. The foundation was laid 3 years ago, and we've been executing. Pandemic maybe accelerated it a little bit, but we've already been doing it. I would say you have to always step back and make sure, I come back to the point around being mission driven and also being very customer centric. So in the end, we can't have business models that are not connected to what consumers are looking for. So I would say in the new world of media, as you think about, you know, the post-pandemic world or the new normal that we live in, one, as a media company for us, you know, we evolved from, hey, it's not just purely content based, but there is much deeper closing the loop for a consumer that you need to think about. So, you know, I always say that if you think about content creators, I think all of us here, I can speak on behalf of everyone who's in media business, we've generally been, other than the, call it news alerts and you know, breaking news, we've been in the inspiration creation business when you think about deep journalism and creating that content. What's happened in the past is you don't keep the entire kind of size of the value chain, right? You normally, maybe you take 10 or 20% of the ad model or something. And, you know, if there is something about travel or lifestyle or entertainment, you know, the next thing a user is doing is going and searching for something, buying a ticket to go on vacation. Of course, they're not traveling as much now, but think about that inspiration a lot of our content creates. And the shift to the business model, I would say, is more of an evolution that we've gone and said, hey, if you're coming and consuming a certain part of content, I want to make sure, if you're thinking about transaction, let's figure out a way to close the loop there so that the consumer has a great experience, doesn't have to go into multi-click process. Two, you also benefit from a business standpoint creating that. So what the pandemic has done is really brought that to light in terms of accelerating some of those business models. It doesn't say that the ad model is going away. I think that accelerates, but also for media companies, small or large, you have to start thinking about how do you follow that consumer journey. I think that's very, very core to that. We also saw our subscription model grow. I mean, I'll give an example. Yahoo Finance Premium that we had launched right before pandemic is when we'd done the 0 to 1 in Q4 grew high triple digits on a year-on-year basis. It's massive when you start looking at those numbers that consumers, want content, want really deep journalism or deep trusted content. Two, they're willing to pay for it in a new business model world. So my takeaway from that is saying, yes, the business models have to evolve. I don't think that changes. You can't be sitting back, looking backwards 20 years back about this is the only model, but it has to be connected and you have to follow the consumer journey. And part of that journey for us, we've taken the approach that advertising plays an important role, right time, right place. Subscription models play a very important role wherever you can go deep and take the consumer through their journey. And then you think about transactions, let that be commerce, or in our case in sports, we take them to go through a journey to do sports betting in legalized states. So as a media company, if you want to create a lot more value, I think this completing that cycle will only enable you to create much more value for yourself and of course your customers as well.
Got it. So there's been a lot of attention recently about the role of misinformation and the Capitol riots on January 6th in the U.S. And yesterday there was a hearing involving broadcast and cable TV and their responsibility in that spread. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the role of news organizations in tackling misinformation, especially over vaccines, which is so relevant at this stage in the pandemic. Michael, is that something you could please speak about?
Yeah, I absolutely think it's essential, Helen. And to me, this is where you get back to the core of all the missions that we're representing of putting forward trusted, qualified journalism. And to me, the ecosystem and the supply chain of content has been disrupted and it needs to be revisited right now. You know, historically, we've always talked about the creation of content, then followed by the distribution of content. And then somewhere along the way, it went from creation to distribution to then verification. I personally think we have that wrong. You have to go from creation to verification to then distribution. And I think all of us are working very hard at making sure that we're following that supply chain of content going forward so we can address this issue of misinformation on a global basis.
Annette, could you please weigh in on that as well?
I think the topic of misinformation, particularly as we've seen it play out in this last year, is really, really important. The ability to access really robust, rigorous, trusted information around science, around the virus, around vaccines, has been incredibly important to all of our readers. I think we would all agree that. And I think what we've seen is that when readers really trust the information that you're giving, that they continue to come back and they continue to engage. We've had enormous engagement around our scientific content in particular. We've had great explainers on the virus and on the science behind that, on the science behind the vaccine. So I think that being able to consistently provide that information, having it associated with your brand, with your organization, builds trust over a long period of time. And that becomes an important foundation for how we think about how we develop our overall news offering going forward and the business off the back of it.
I would just add, sorry, just to echo what Annette and Michael you said, one of the core pillars for us, if you think about our mission, we've always led with trusted content as the core foundational pillar of everything we do. One of the decisions we made, part of that is to not be in UGC and social, because at that scale, back to, I think, Michael's point, creation, verification, and distribution, you can create very easily at scale when you think about UGC, but verification, not something that you do easily when you think about deep journalism and content creation. So that's the approach we've taken. I think all three of us here can attest to that. When you start going deep and building that trust, facts matter. Consistency is key when you think about delivering premium quality and trusted content on an ongoing basis. Diversity of thought points, and how do you verify that? And also showing the 360-degree view on stories, right? When you think about election to what's happening in every part of the world, or any core issues that we're talking about. So a lot of that comes to really, again, thinking about creation, verification, back to Michael's point, and then how you think then about distribution, rather than thinking about distribution first, because that's where you don't create trust if you have misinformation and something that you're not verified. So it's a very core part of how we operate, and I have a lot of respect for what Nat and Michael, you guys do organizationally to bring that to the ecosystem, and it's good to see the progress we're making in that.
And looking forward to the next 6 to 12 months, how are you thinking about your news organizations during that time? What keeps you up at night? And what do you most focus on as you lead through this next stage of the pandemic, and hopefully an emergence into a more normal, safe world as the vaccine rollouts continue? Michael, could you start with that?
Yeah, Helen, I think it comes to three things that I'm thinking about. First is the recommitment to trust via transparency. I think there are too many news organizations today that, quite frankly, just assume trust versus earn that trust each and every day. So I'm hopeful in the next 6 to 12 months that we can all lean in and give a little bit more transparency into the journalism that we're producing to earn that trust from our readership. The second thing is a reimagined news organization, a reimagined newsroom where we're going to be much more flexible in the way that we work in this hybrid work environment, hopefully as vaccines roll out, a more diverse newsroom that's going to share different perspectives, and a much more digitalized newsroom to move faster. And then finally, what we just talked about, a redefined supply chain of content that really leans into creation, verification, and then distribution. I think if media companies can do those, then I think they have a very bright future moving ahead.
And Annette?
What I'm most looking forward to is the pandemic being brought under control. In our own business, we're focused on keeping our people safe and building out our plans for a future that's based on our purpose, on our quality journalism, being reader-centric, and putting the many, many good lessons that we've learned over this past 12 months into action.
And Guru, your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I would say you think about next 6 months or year, and as you think about the transformation in media, but our industry generally. First, speaking from a Verizon Media's perspective, our mission is even more relevant and critical now, thinking about connecting people to their passions. The pillars that will take us forward and the need for news and media, and call it content, is only growing. And there is a new digital world and a new normal that we are in. If you take that, the first bucket, I come back to what I mentioned earlier, the trusted content piece, is very, very critical this year and beyond, and top it that with a lot of customization and personalization as you bring in. We are doing that. We've got some big launches coming in, really bringing that personalization and more that one-to-one news, if you will, rather than many to one, and how you bring that much more closing the ecosystem. Tied within the trusted content, again, the new experiences. I've always talked about 5G, what 5G does to content experience and digitizing what we have. AR and VR becoming much more bigger mainstream in that personalized world. So I'm excited for that. And that again squarely fits into our core mission. The second bucket I'd call out is connections. I think we've seen this during pandemic where people and consumers are willing to go deeper into premium experiences. I talk about, TechCrunch, Extra Crunch, or the Yahoo Finance Premium, or the Yahoo Fantasy Sports. A lot of these products really going deeper for consumers, and also our consumers going into new channels. Today we have Yahoo News as one of the leading source of trusted content on emerging channels like TikTok. We grew to 1 million followers in one of the shortest time frame as a news brand, as you think about that. So those are the pieces that you want to start building, those deep niche connections, which are big enough, but creating that customer journey. And then transactions, I already mentioned, media companies evolving into not just ad-based, but also going into commerce and much deeper closing the loop. And the last piece, which I started with early on, is being a responsible business. I think the biggest lesson from last year is around mental health and how we take care of our employees, our stakeholders, our customers. Companies need to start taking this even more serious as you think about next 6 months, 1 year, next 10 years, and the focus and need for reimagining of corporate mental health isn't going away in 2021, and that's a good thing. The focus is going to be there. And when you think about what we're doing as Citizen Verizon, which is our responsible business platform for economic, environmental, and societal change, and mental health will be a big piece of that impact. So I'm really excited to have an impact across all these areas and impacting our stakeholders in a very positive way as the media industry evolves.
We're out of time, but thank you very much for joining us. This has been a great conversation. Thank you to Annette, Michael, and Guru for joining us during this very interesting time in the media industry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.